me a little bit about what you have here.
Gotcha. So the typical tray that most folks in the United States are using are those 72 cell trays.
Right. The thin wall, they break apart. We know what they are. We use them all the time.
You look at them, and basically the directions are put the soil on top, put the water on the bottom. And so what they tend to do is they pick up the corner, they pour the water in.
Right.
Those seedlings then sit in that water.
Yep.
What happens when a root comes in contact with water? It creates a long taproot.
Right.
Right. And so while that seedling is creating a taproot, what it's not creating is these microfilament nutrient gathering roots at the top of the root ball.
Interesting.
Okay? Those things also have a little X at the bottom, so it's extremely difficult to get it out.
Yep.
While we're trying to get it out, we're damaging the microfilament roots. And then we're also disrupting the taproot. When we finally get it out, we end up with kind of like a flaccid root ball that we then put in the ground. When we put it in the ground, that long taproot gets bound and goes into transplant shock. And so you put your seedling in there, and then it takes a week or a week and a half to actually start putting on new foliar growth. I see new foliar growth with these in like 24 to 48 hours. The main difference when we use this system, we're doing bottom watering. We're taking this tray and we're filling up to like past the line. We're allowing the water to then wick up into the soil, and then either getting rid of the water and putting it back in a dry tray, or we're putting it up on a kitchen rack with wires so that this always has contact with air at the bottom. So what happens, that same taproot, it hits that air, it says, I don't like that, and then it starts devoting all its time into creating these microfilament roots. So I can push it out really easily, and I've got a root ball that will hold its shape, that doesn't drop any soil, that doesn't have a taproot coming out of the bottom to get damaged when I plant it. While I'm packing these, I'm putting the soil in, and I'm compressing it to a good rate because roots like a little something to hold on to. When I then go to plant them in the garden, I use a dibber. What the dibber does is it compresses the soil out in a consistent way. So as I'm pressing into the soil rather than spading, I'm pressing down. You could do this with your thumbs. Right. Yeah, you could do this with a stick. This was well rounded so that it is like the opposites, like the negative of the seedling. I know there's a bunch of science in it.
Yeah.
What it also does is it compresses the soil at a super consistent rate all around it. Okay. And the seedling that has been compressed in the tray goes into the compressed soil, and it doesn't know that it's been transplanted. So it doesn't go through transplant shock. So that's why we see new foliar growth really, really quickly. For somebody who has a short growing season, and growing seasons, in my opinion, are always too short because we get busy. We're always behind,
right?
Like, of course, because we're human. That will save you a week or a week and a half on your growing season, just understanding putting in a healthy seedling into the right soil density.
And that means at the end of the season, that's an additional week of fruition,
right?
Of production.
Yeah, or when we have varying temperatures, like temperatures are changing, a tomato blossom has to be at a certain temperature at night to be able to actually turn into fruit. And if you're late in the season, if you're too late in the season, then the temperatures will get maybe too hot for you. And so those flowers don't turn it into a tomato.
So you could also miss the boat too.
Yeah,
you could miss the boat. So this helps you not miss the boat, even if you're a little late to the start, which a lot of people are.
Right.
And then it allows you to get that longer yield because you haven't stunted your plant growth.
Right, exactly. So if you think about like using a spade, so we don't use a spade, we're no-dig gardeners.
Right.
So if you use a spade, the back of the spade will compress the soil, and then as you tilt it out, it loosens all the soil on the left-hand side, and roots always go to the easy spot. So if I have loose soil on the left and tight soil on the right,
it's going to be lopsided.
All of it's going to go to the direction, and then sometimes you get plants that'll fall over. That's because we don't have a good round root structure. If I can make all that soil dense in the same way, then the roots grow in every direction consistently. So I get a much better cone-shaped root structure, which is what I want on vegetables, like on a tomato, for example. And then I can tell you basically when I have a healthy seedling, like pests always go to the weakest seedling, right? And so if you've got the weakest plants in the neighborhood, you're going to get all the pests. If I can put a healthy seedling into the ground, a tomato plant, even though it's very small, can defend itself if it's healthy. It's going to put off toxins, basically natural pesticides. It's that great aroma that we really enjoy when you play with your tomatoes. You also get that green stuff. That's basically a natural pesticide. They don't produce that when they're weak. That's why they get attacked at the end of the season. They don't produce that when they're super young if they're unhealthy. And so if I can get a healthy seedling into the ground, and that doesn't just go for tomatoes, it goes for all plants. If I can get a healthy seedling into the ground, I've got like 90% of the problem solved from the beginning.
So you really have put a lot of thought and science and trial and error into the whole seed starting up to production and making your plants healthy, keeping them healthy, right from the seedlings stage all the way on up, including watering, maintenance, root development, as well as transplanting and then eliminating that transplant shock.
Right. Eliminating transplant shock is huge. I mean, it really, you're getting life off to a bad start if you do it any other way. The way I kind of describe it is, there's in that 72 cell system that we're all used to, there's just a lot of stupid built into that system, and there's no one to tell you. Like, no one's standing over your shoulder. Like, you're seeding for the first time. You get a bunch of bad seedlings, you put them in the ground, a bunch of them die or they produce poorly, and you're just a bad gardener, which isn't the case at all. Like, you just really started in a bad system. This system has a lot of science built into it, and I never get to describe it the way I just got to describe it to you.
Yeah.
But what it does is just put you into best practices by default, and you do 90% of it right. There's very few variables. If they don't germinate right, you had old seeds. You really don't have anything else to worry about in this system. If you do a few things correct, then you get off to a great start.
So it really does take a chance to eliminate a lot of the inefficiencies that come from planting a garden.
So during COVID, 20 million people in the United States started gardening for the first time.
Yep.
They went and bought 72 cell trays.
Yep.
Not all of them, but the ones that decided to start from seed, they went and bought those 72 cell trays and they said, I suck at gardening.
Yep.
Or man gardening is hard.
A lot of them gave it up.
And then they gave it up.
They sit out.
They gave it up. And there's no reason for them to understand how to use that system properly. It's full of pitfalls. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing kind of your take on this whole thing. First of all, I really like the concept of sustainability because, if we have disposable anything, it pretty much isn't what I want to use.
It better be done correctly. So this is 100% recycled.
Yep.
It's made from post-consumer recycled material. It's 100% polypropylene. It's also recyclable.
Okay.
Because it's 100% polypropylene, it's non-porous, so it doesn't, you don't get algae or mildew issues. It's also UV stable. So if you do forget it out in the garden, which happens all the time, it's not going to go brittle on you for about 15 years. If you keep good care of them, if you put them in the shade between seasons, then you're getting about 30 years out of a tray like this.
Wow.
So it's $12.50.
This is like a permanent infrastructure upgrade to your whole gardening process, rather than a throwaway container. You're going to spend about half that and then throw away at the end of the season, or it's going to break midway through the season.
Right. So I see a lot of people, maybe reusing, egg cartons because they're made out of paper, or using solo cups, or even worse, styrofoam cups, right? And you're having to continue to go through that consumable all the time. Like, I don't want to. I want a closed system as much as I can. My nutrients stay in the garden. They come from the chickens that we have. This never leaves. This is the last one I have to buy. It's minimal impact. And it just creates a consistent process that gives me consistent results all the time.
Right. So instead of it being like a garden supply, it's more like infrastructure.
Yeah, right. It's a garden investment.
It's an investment in your garden.
I mean, we invest in a lot of other things, and then there's some things that we just feel like we don't want to invest in, and this is something that, and by investment I mean those are $12.50. You're $100 away from being set up from like the garden that you'll like for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be able to start seeds well.
Yeah, can you mention a little bit about the root ball? You were saying earlier how if you get a potted tree, the roots go around, and then in the center you don't.
So I spend a lot of time telling people to start small, and like when you go to the garden store and you see a seedling, or when you buy a small plant that's in like a 5 or 10 gallon bucket, what happens is those roots spread out to the outside. When they hit the edge, they then start to circle, and it makes like a skirt of roots. And then when you go to plant it in the garden, you break up the roots. That's what they tell you to do. And then all the soil falls out of the middle because it doesn't have a root structure in the middle, right? Same thing happens on a micro scale when you plant too big. So if we start with a really big soil block, because you can't really pot up when you're soil blocking, you get the same scenario. That it takes a really long time for roots to really fill out a robust root system. So if I start small like this, I get microfilament roots for the entirety of that root ball. If I were to then pot it up into a slightly larger cell, then I'm going to get root growth in every direction that will then fill in that space. So I pot up gradually. I have multiple other sizes, but like the 15 cell right there is almost like a 4-inch pot. It's like a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch modular cell. Okay. And it's tempting to start in that, but that will create cone root if that's the first time that I started it.
So what you do is you recommend putting starts in something small,
and then I'll pot up.
So what size is this called?
This is a CD60, so this is 60 cell.
Okay, so you use it by the size in the tray rather than 1 inch by 1 inch or whatever.
They all have the same footprint, which is, that 72 cell system is 10 inch by 20 inch. This one is 9.5 by 14. So it's a lot smaller. You can fit a lot more plants in a much smaller space.
It's good for people who are starting small, absolutely.
Most racks will hold 2 of those in depth, so that's 120 plants in the same space that you would have only fit 72 because you can't, they're too long, you know.
So now the base, what do you call this?
Bottom watering tray.
Bottom water tray, and they're interchangeable, modular for all the different sizes.
Yeah, so all of the trays will fit within the bottom watering tray.
Okay.
The smallest trays obviously don't fit it, but you can still bottom water like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So you have the CD60, which is the smallest one. Now, what's the next size up from that?
In cellular size would be the 40 size.
40 size.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then from there, so 60, 40, 15. Between there is actually a 28, but that's a deep, like 7 inches deep.
Okay, so that may be for a different.
That's for cuttings. Yeah, cuttings or tree starts.
Trees. Yep.
Yeah.
They have a longer
At
chapter.
home we have a bunch of figs in there.
Okay.
So we're propagating figs in that. So we take cuttings off of our fig tree, trim the cambium, root starter, and then put it in the soil. And then now we have 15 new fig trees.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I've learned a lot. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, man.
Especially do you call it a dibbler?
Yeah,
Is that
dibbler.
right?
Yeah.
Dibber?
Dibber, dibbler, or dibble.
I've heard it as dibbler, but yeah.
It's dibbler, dibber, or dibble. It's all the same thing.
So it actually compresses the soil in a uniform pattern,
Right.
so that you don't
So
have
you get
any kind of
uniform
lopsided
root growth.
plant growth. You don't have a whole lot of tilting problem.
Right.
And it is actually preformed, so if you want to drop it, if you want to take one of your starts, plop it out,
Right.
and put that plug right into the ground. This about is the same shape and size that you'd need it
Right, correct.
to be, and you can go to whatever depth you need
Right.
using this. So that's a really handy tool. Did you guys make this?
They are handmade by a wood turner in Maine.
Okay.
We don't produce them ourselves. I just contract with the manufacturer.
But you work with them, and then that works with your system here.
Yeah,
That's
and
fantastic.
there's a 12-inch version for raised beds.
Okay.
So like if you're talking about real, like the Birdies or Vago raised beds, and then we have a 24-inch version for in-ground gardening.
Okay, great. So are there any other tools of the trade that you'd recommend for people who are starting out?
What are these?
Starting out, that's to pop out the. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Wow.
That's to
I
pop
was
it out.
thinking about my.
I use my pinky,
Yeah, good
but if you have one that's
Growing
Okay.
yeah, we produce a growing guide for zones 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, so 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Okay.
But that's pretty local to us. We'll eventually
You guys are in
expand it.
Texas.
Yeah, we're in
Okay.
Texas.
Okay.
Yeah. So this creates. This is a plant search. This is definitely not like a beginner gardener item. This is gardening nerd level 10.
Okay.
If you've heard of electroculture, this is kind of along the same lines. What this does is create structured water and it magnetizes water. When you if you like drink a lot of water, really all you'll do is pass it. But if you drink a small amount of water over a long period of time, you have the opportunity to intake water. That's because your body is actually magnetizing that water.
Okay.
So magnetic water is easier to pass through cell walls. And same thing happens in ground. So when you get light rain for a long period of time, the plants that water has the time to be magnetized so that it's easier for the plants to uptake. So it requires a lot less water. So this instantly magnetizes water as it comes out of the hose. So it clips over the garden hose. And then it magnetizes the water, so it basically makes it soluble to the plants immediately.
So you can make your plant's uptake of water more efficient, thereby
more
needing
efficient.
and requiring less water and less watering.
Right, less watering required. You can water for a shorter time, and the plants will be able to absorb more water without it running off. It produces 80% more blooms. So it's really popular in like gardening, like cut flower gardening, because it's real showy. But for a tomato plant, that means 80% more blooms and 80% more tomatoes.
That's true. So yield is great.
Yeah, it improves yields, it improves foliar growth. It's hard to see a difference in like the very early like germination stage. It doesn't make much of a difference. It doesn't make much of a difference in like the first 2-3 weeks of a plant. After that, it takes off dramatically.
Oh wow.
So every time you water, you just always have that on the hose.
It also changes the structural, it makes it a hexagonal water, which is magnetized water, takes a slightly different shape, and it breaks down chlorine, like hard compounds. They use the same technology in like water softening.
Right.
It separates chlorine into 2 compounds so that If you have chlorinated water coming from a municipal source, when the water hits the ground, the chlorine instantly dissipates instead of taking a full 24 hours to dissipate.
Oh, wow.
So you're not
Without
chlorinating
adding
your
additional
microbiome.
Right.
So
chemicals.
I spent years cultivating this perfect soil that's full of bacterial life, and then I'm dumping chlorine water all over it because I live in Texas and we just had a 3-month-long drought, and I had no choice but to put a bunch of city water on it, and this way I wasn't pumping chlorine into the ground.
Great. Yeah, you don't want to spend all that time on your soil then just to sanitize it, because that kind of destroys the
Basically
micronutrients.
sanitizing it, killing all the microbes.
So this is really cool, and I'm guessing this is sort of like a component to this invention right here.
Yeah.
Because it sort of acts as your plug ejector, I guess. So you can do 6 at a time instead of using your thumb. But if you want to use a thumb, you can also do that.
Right.
That's kind of cool. So these come with the trays, or you buy them separate?
It's a la carte. Yeah, everything comes separate.
Okay.
You can order a tray. You can get the popper, and these are formatted. So all of these trays are designed by Charles Dowding, who's like a world-renowned market gardener, based out of England. He started out with a different size tray, and then asked the manufacturer if they could create something specific to his needs.
Okay.
We're the only place in North America you can get them.
Okay.
And so this is formatted to fit this tray, which is a 15 cell. This 30 cell, and then the CDC.
And the 6. Oh, okay. So for the different size
none
cells,
of
you might
those
have...
need something to pop out, because
Oh, you don't have a popper. Okay.
they're all the holes on the other trays are big enough that you can put a thumb.
You can
through.
actually get your full thumb in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So this might be for just the smallest ones, where you can't quite
Small
get your
ones
thumb
and
in all the
people with
way.
big fingers.
Right. Excellent.
I don't actually need one of those. I'm able to just pop them out.
Right.
The integrity of the root ball is such that, because it's not porous at all, it doesn't hold on anything. It pops right out.
Just pops right out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing with us what you have today. Really impressed with the product, and like to talk more.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
All right.